Noting the time and the presence of a quorum, I call this meeting of the Acton Finance Committee to order. My understanding is that this is being recorded, and therefore we are good to go. First item on the agenda is public participation. I see a member of the public running to the microphone. The only person in the room.
Good evening. I'm David Martin. I live on Hyder in one IT position. And as Scott recommended, delaying the hiring of the other few to mid-year, canceling a small handful of projects, and some small reductions in supplies and things. Thank you.
Thank you, Selectman Martin. I know that a few of us were able to tune in to last night's select board meeting. And that actually is a very good segue into the next item on the agenda, which is the budget review post ALG, just by way of setting the stage for this. As you guys may recall, at our last meeting before, our last FinCom meeting before ALG, we went around the table and asked what we were expecting, wanting out of the ALG process. And we reiterated that we were looking for 3%, to stay in the 3% range. Scott and I presented that to the ALG. It is safe to say it was not met with an abundance of cheers and joy. But I'm happy to see that they clearly are listening and have started to pare things back. So by way of quick reminder, I believe we were at 4.8, something like that.
4.56, they cut it down to 3.81.
So, sorry, I overshot. 4.56 down to 3.81. And that is, you know, they're halfway there in my mind. So I definitely do want to point out that yes, change has happened since our last meeting. That's a good thing. This is definitely the right direction. This is what we're looking for. I guess what I'm going to open up to the committee is, do we feel that this is the number that we are comfortable with and want to go back to consensus for, or do we continue to wish to hold to our point of view of 3%? I would also add that they are still adding new personnel. They're still adding new FTEs in this budget, which I clearly have heard and I clearly understand the argument, although I don't buy it, that they have been on hold and that's a form of cut. But having rising FTEs the year after an override does not feel like level services to me. That said, I would like to open up the table. Scott, is there anything that you wish to add from the ALG meeting, or do you want me to just head it over to the other people who may have listened to the meeting last night? Very good. Anybody else who listened to the meeting last night wish to weigh in? I see one raised hand.
First of all, if you missed last night's meeting, it went 5 hours before I gave up after midnight, and I think they were still going.
No, they gavelled it closed at 12:22.
Oh, then I only missed the last 22 minutes. Okay. It started at 7, and I bailed somewhere around midnight, but around the 11 o'clock time frame is when they got to the budget. And I took notes. David is correct and accurate, and let me just put a little more meat on that bone. The way they are cutting from 4.56 down to 3.81 is about $290,000 in cuts to staff One is the new firefighter, one of the two new firefighters they were proposing. So they're cutting one, keeping the other. One is a help desk position, and the third is a digital communications position. They're also reducing funding for a police lieutenant and a benefits coordinator and election workers. So that doesn't change FTEs per se, but it has some budget impacts. And they're reducing the line items for some supplies and equipment. When it came to the capital budget, they're cutting that by $175,000. What's proposed last night and accepted was cutting some building improvements, some of the replacement for town meeting clickers, vegetation management, and turnout gear for the firefighters. And complicating the cuts that they are trying to make, they also announced last night that the health insurance increase is bigger than they had projected at the previous ALG meeting. And so they had to absorb another $160K on top of what they had estimated. So when you wrap it all together, they wrestled late at night with a lot of tough issues, and that can't be an easy assignment to deal with. Now, where do we go from here? We got, during our budget hearings, this one little sheet of paper. There was FTE by department, including new positions and FY26 and other funding sources. So I went through that today as a sort of a refresher. And one of the things that Jason's already alluded to, and I think we need to discuss tonight, is, yeah, they've cut 3 FTEs, but they were asking for an increase of 5.897 FTEs. So, they cut 3, maybe we should take a look at the 3 that are going on top of the workforce. But as I was looking at that and trying to figure out where they were, what the trends were, I was surprised I hadn't seen this earlier. So let me share with you some really weird trends. One of the things we haven't talked about is that the land use department used to have 15.28 FTEs in fiscal '24 and is down to 10. So not every department's gotten bigger, some actually got smaller. Another department like that is Public Works. In fiscal year '24, they had 41 FTEs. Currently, they've got 34. And one of the things that then makes it hard to deal with is if you deal with averages, you look at the bottom line and say, okay, we've got 6 new, and okay, they cut 3, and what about the other 3? The answer is there's a lot of movement going along. So while those have been going down, operations has jumped from 5.3 FTEs up to 14.3. Operations?
Looking at the org chart for land use, the health division was reallocated under the Health and Human Services Department beginning in FY25. So that is why land use went from 15.28 down to 10.5. And it's on page 58 of the budget.
Yeah.
That's the trend. I mean, that's what
But stuff is moving around, which is the point I'm going to try to make here.
Gotcha.
Okay? I mean, the bottom line is we had 222 employees a couple years ago, and now we have a budget of 225 or so. So we're up 3 over the last couple of years. But that hides the fact that a lot of people are being reassigned. There have been several reorgs. Council on Aging is now part of the Health and Family Services. HR has moved to Finance. Veterans has moved to Health and Family Services. And so one of the things that I think we can go back to the Finance Committee, or the Select Board with the Finance Committee point of view is you have a lot of really dynamic things going on here. Things are moving. I think we've heard this from the Finance Department's report that if somebody leaves, they don't just fill the slot. They rethink, what do we actually need? Do we need to rethink that? There's a lot of creative stuff going on. And I don't say that in a pejorative sense of creative. Nah, they're hiding the bodies. No. They are trying to move resources to where they think they have needs. With that much fluidity, with that much movement, figuring out 3 more positions, 3 more FTEs to cut is not, I think, as overwhelming as if the departments that we were talking about had been cemented in place for 5 years, and we all knew that if we lost this person, we'd lose that service. This is one where, maybe one more reorg, we could save a position here. One more reclassification, we could save FTE there. It's a lot easier when you have more moving pieces to make these kinds of things, rather than go at this from okay, how many of us love, pick the department, how many people hate this department, and let's all vote. It becomes a much easier assignment to say, 3 positions, you found 3 last night. We think you can find 3 more. You're pretty ingenious about adapting to change. So keeping your FTEs level would, really help make the case that you're doing your best effort to stay under the 3% guideline. Now, that then, this is going to sound bad, but I can't think of a way around it. We were told this is a level-funded budget. These are level-funded services. If I went to any of the organizations I've worked with over the years and said, I've got 3 new positions, I've got 6 new positions, and that's level-funded, I would be sent back to work on my spreadsheet again. So I think there isn't anything draconian or mean-spirited or, we're out for revenge or any of that kind of stuff. This is like, we think you can find 3 more positions in here. They're there. They've been added. And you may have to move some other stuff around, but guess what? You've already moved other stuff around pretty effectively over the last couple of years, and I don't see things falling off a cliff. And if we go from 225 FTEs back to 222 FTEs, that sounds like round-off error, but it turns out those 3 FTEs are the difference between hitting at 3.81% and getting a lot closer to 3. So that was number 1. Number 2, the capital budget. The capital budget is broken out separately, and last night they made a couple of cuts. They made 4. So, there was an extensive discussion about what else would we cut if we cut next. And basically at 11:30 at night, nobody wanted to dig deeper into what the 5th cut might look like. And I totally understand that. But I went through this report, and one of the things that I came up with was a list of 24 new programs or projects that different departments were putting together, and they were highlighting them because they're proud of them. And by the way, it shows a lot of creativity and ingenuity and innovation and, initiative, all of the things that we'd want to basically have any town employee be proud of. I did something new this year. And instead of 24 of them, they've cut 4 out, okay. So we're still going to have 20 new initiatives. I think it wouldn't crush employee morale to find 1 or 2 or 3 more projects that aren't on the to-do list for the coming year. So part of me says, okay, nobody anticipated that the healthcare thing was going to shoot up higher than we expected. I know, we got surprised last year by that. And yeah, they have come towards our position, and that's to be congratulated and thank them for that. But I don't think we are being unreasonable to say you can get closer to the 3% and not put the town in jeopardy.
So if I'm hearing you right, you're also happy they're on the right glide path, but they're not there in your eyes quite yet. At this point, I'd like to talk, I'd like to put Mr. Noon on the spot actually for a second and talk about sort of the 3 largest buckets in the budget and how any one of them can be, if any one of them can be cut and or trimmed or right-sized or whatever terminology you want to use when you were paying attention to the fact that we have to worry about years to come and making sure that we're bending the arc in the right direction.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I should have given you a heads up.
So my first blush of the budget was that 97% of the variance was accounted by 3 items, and those were salaries, Middlesex pension, and healthcare. Of the 3, we really only have control over one of those salaries, which evidently, that is the one that the Board of Selectmen and Town Manager have chosen to work on. Unfortunately, we also had an increase in health insurance that was unanticipated. Help me out with my math here. I think I wrote down there was $290,000 in savings and $160 going the other way in health insurance, which if I'm doing this math right in my head, it nets out to 130, which also nets out to what the deficit for the fiscal year was showing on the ALG plan. So, in effect, we are balanced. Going forward, well, first I'll say, so I can live with it. If it's balanced, I can live with this year. Going forward, my calculus is the same. Next year, we will have probably 97, 95% of the budget increase on the same 3 items. And we won't have any more control over Middlesex pension nor over health insurance. Which leads me to the only lever we're going to have for the next few years is salaries and deployment of people, if you will. And if we need to hold to 3%, and I think we do, simply because not only will those things be increasing, and historically they've increased more than 3% over the years, we will also be adding some general fund debt from the forecast years in the capital plan, to the numbers that are here. So my view is I can live with this year as it stands, but somebody has to come up with a way to redeploy headcount. And if we need firefighters, then that position has to be cut somewhere else. Then we have to basically hold with our headcount going forward until we can see that we can keep a balanced budget in the future years as well.
Okay. I did neglect to report that one of the asks at ALG was if we wanted to come back with specific line items or whatnot to cut. And I did send out an email to the entire committee asking for your feedback on that. But I am also very hesitant to try and do that, because what ends up happening there is if you pick a line item, then it becomes very easy to defend, or it's very easy to have people show up in advocacy of a specific line item. Whereas pointing out the realization of we have a law that we have to comply with, and the only way to and I won't say violate because it's not right, but the only way to get around, the only way to avoid the consequences or the expectations of that law is through an override. I would refer back to just how close last year was. So I think they can get a little closer to 3%. As for the statement that it's been transferred to the Finance Committee, that's fine. They can transfer another one later. We just have to, they have to transfer a budget in a certain amount of time. We have to hold a budget hearing. That is also state law. So we're going to be having a hearing, which in years past has taken less than 3 minutes. The chair reads 2 paragraphs, asks if anybody has questions, and the hearing's over. So we can definitely make sure to make the hearing requirements. So I don't think it's not set in stone that since they've sent us this one budget that we're done with this. We can negotiate right up to town meeting. Roland, did you have your hand raised?
So looking over the FTEs, I did notice that Sustainability Office has 2 people. And I'm wondering why, because before it only had 1. And that was added with, I might be wrong on this, with ARPA funds, but I'm not sure on that. But I know we need one to get certain grants and things like that, but do we need 2 people in that office? Or can that be one of them where that additional person can be deployed somewhere else, even if it's half, like maybe they'd be half in the Sustainability Office and half in something else if they're working on grants or whatever. So that's kind of what that jumps out at me right there. That's all I had to comment right now.
So are you comfortable with 3.81, or do you think they've got another head count or 2 to go?
Head count or 2 to go.
Okay.
I mean, we did say in our point of view in September, 3%, right? And I give them, applause for going from 4.56 to 3.81. But they need to get closer to the 3. I mean, it just becomes on the budgetary it boils right down to taxes, right? Again, going back to the land homeowner. We don't have a lot of businesses in town. We need more, obviously. I did go to Crossroads on Friday night. I was happy that it was really crowded for once. I haven't seen that in a while there, which is good. They said they were really busy, which is great. But at one point they had 40 people working for them. They're down to 18. Their business changed. They had to adjust, right? Same thing in the town. I mean, we can't keep going back to the well over and over and over again. But eventually people are going to say, hey, I can't afford it. I'm going to move out. So, I mean, I think, and then the house sells, and then a family comes in and you have two or three kids in the schools, and, instead of somebody that's maybe retired or what have you, still staying in the town because they can afford it.
Thank you. Christie?
Ideally, we would just let the town run itself. I mean, in the sense of, the town knows operations. And they could just come and say, we need this amount of money. But part of our job is to look at the ways in which they're spending the money, how that affects long-term. And the fact is, if they spend the money on personnel, that hits us in a much larger percentage than if they do projects. So I said last time, I'm okay with it. I mean, I was okay with the number before, it was 3.81%. I would love to see that current number with the flip around to no FTE growth, therefore not having the promise of more growth next year, and do it on capital projects and the other things that need to happen. I think that's better long-term fiscal planning.
Very well. Dr. Chair?
And I also support further cut on the headcount. The FTE, and the reasons are two. Number one, this is the year after the override that barely passed. It's passed by a small margin, so it's not a growth year. And the population is not growing, and we're not looking for increased services, so it's reasonable to keep the same FTE. Number two is that I have mentioned this before, and I want to emphasize that, is that the two of the three items that Steve mentioned, the health insurance and pension costs, they are going to keep going up. They are not slowing down. Health insurance is tied with inflation, and it looks like the inflation is not slowing down anytime soon, or soon as we expect. The pension cost is also going to go up because the Middlesex pension system is underwater. And it's also tied to the stock market. And now the stock market is doing well, but once there's anything slowing down in the stock market, the pension costs will also go up. This year, the health insurance went up by 9.88%, and the pension costs go up by 7.11%. And this is projectable, meaning that you know that next year will go more or less at the same rate. It's getting more expensive to hire government employees because of this, because these two items are tied to the payroll. And we do the calculation, is about 50% of the payroll. Adding FTE will also add to this, will add these fringe benefits. It will get more expensive in the future. So I'm in support of cutting more FTEs, keep the FTEs at the same level.
Thank you. Any other comments on this one? It's all you, Scott.
Generally, I agree with a couple of the Finance Committee members here on the go-forward expense that Steve and Christie spoke of. I listened to the Select Board meeting last night, and the impression I had was that there was a lot of support for the town budget to be greater than 3%. And going forward, it just becomes, as Jason, you have mentioned before, it becomes a math problem. Is that if one part of the budget is constantly at 4 or 5%, and the other part of the budget is within, the guidelines, at some point you have to have an override. And I think everybody agrees that an override would not be passed, which means that there would have to be cuts. So where would those cuts come from? And I don't know where they would come from, but they would be, they would have to come from someplace. And so the existing budget, which is now at 3.8%, 3.81%, I think that the actual results for the year will be a little better than that, because I don't believe the hiring is going to be as efficient as planned. And I think there'll be some additional savings and compensation that will bring that number down a little bit. But I do feel strongly that going forward, that there needs to be in that 3% or the 3.5% that we've always suggested needs to be in line going forward. But I think that there needs to be a plan. Well, my last thought is that there needs to be a plan with the understanding that the operation of the town needs to find a way to either outsource some work, assuming that all these services have to be provided forever and we're not going to cut services. There needs to be a way to either find a cheaper way to provide the same services. Because at some point, we're going to be faced with a situation where we're going to have to eliminate staff. And whatever staff we're eliminating is not going to, it's going to cost us a service. And I think thinking through that now will prevent a disruption in services going forward.
If it's brief, because that's a very good segue into the next section. So if it's brief, go ahead.
Well, all I wanted to add was, at a different part of last night's select board meeting, they met with the folks from the food pantry. And one of the things that happened in real time is I do think they're listening to us. I do think they are becoming more mindful, because once upon a time, they might have told the food pantry, thank you very much, go do what you're going to do. Last night, they basically adopted a policy that said, we're going to need to charge you a minimum. I think they capped it at, I forget, was it 4,000 or something? Yeah.
Yeah, that wasn't unanimous, though. That was just a couple of people.
I hear you, but we'll take progress where it shows itself.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I just wanted to say, I think we all agree on the problem. We have a compensation model that outpaces our revenue model. When I say I'm happy with this year, after a long time on this committee, seeing anything in balance in February is a victory. I'd rather they spend the time taking a longer view of their headcount deployment for fiscal '27 and beyond than spend a whole lot more time trying to trim 3 more heads out of this year's budget. That's my only point. I think we all agree that we can't afford the compensation model we have, and the only way to keep it in line with the revenue model we have is fewer people.
So that is a very good segue into the next main topic item, the next agenda item, which is a policy about overrides. And this is an initial conversation on this topic. This did come directly out of ALG, where the moderator basically said to us, unless you really think you can stay within 3% per year, every year, forever and ever, with inflation north of 3% for more years than not, then you probably should start having a conversation about when, as a committee, we might be open to the topic of an override. When I was thinking about this, the one thing I definitely do not want to do is I definitely do not want to say, well, every 3 years or every 5 years or over X number of dates, because that's, it's impossible to foresee what the conditions on the ground are going to be. It also means that if you get your timing wrong with your union negotiations, you've got no opportunity to protect yourself when it comes time to negotiations. So I guess I wanted to start by saying I don't feel that Prop 2.5 is a perfect beacon of exactly how to live our lives. Prop 2.5, even if we have new growth every year and can come up with 3%, 3% is quite limiting. This is the problem that we've all been saying. That said, I don't want to suggest that we're just going to say, well, whenever we need to take the pressure off, we'll just make sure that we get behind an override. Because I don't think that's really how things are going to work. And I don't expect us to solve this tonight. This is, as I wrote on the agenda, this is an initial conversation. So definitely want everyone's input on this. Did we want to do something like try and tie it more closely to inflation? Where we say, if inflation over the last 5 years has been at 20%, and over 5 years, we've only been at 15% because of, or 16%, 17% compounded, then maybe it's time for a true-up. That's one possibility. Of course, we find ourselves in a situation where our government has already outpaced inflation significantly over the last 7 years, as shown in our point of view. So I see two people with their hand raised. I'll go with Scott first. And by the way, that was not meant to be, I'm setting a policy now. This is meant to be saying, I'm throwing out an idea. I'm looking for input. I suspect we're going to have to discuss this for multiple meetings before we can give guidance to the select board of the town and the school district.
It's not a bad concept to tie to inflation, but I think most people would think that if you gave your town more money to spend, they would just spend it. I think maybe a better metric would be to tie to the average municipal or teachers' union increases. So the majority of our compensation the majority of our expense is salary. And a lot of those are negotiated through contracts. And those contracts are very public and they're easily accessed. And if you took the average of the contracts that were renewed and used that as the growth indicator, it would at least cover the cost of compensation that we're going to be tied to in contracts. And then it would give the other areas of town and probably a little bit more wiggle room than they would underneath Prop 2.5, but not so much that they can, spend wildly. So that's my thought.
Thanks. Well, what are the best practices for this? What are the benchmarks from other towns? I mean, I don't have answers, but I have questions, right? And what are the subjective factors versus the objective factors that weigh into this sort of thing, right? We had a barely passed override last year. Not barely passed, but, a thin margin. So what is the appetite? What is the overall outlook for, the various municipal economies, et cetera, et cetera? So if we started to whiteboard it, which we're kind of doing a little bit right now, I could just ask 50 questions right off the top of things that would factor into what our appetite would be 3 years from now. However, something can happen tomorrow, and we know how fast things are changing nowadays, that could cause us to completely 180 what we just talked about tonight. So, I just wanted to kind of put a couple things out there into the ether for us to think about as we go through this conversation.
So I would think, inside out from what Scott just said, I wouldn't want to set our increases to the teachers' contracts increases. I'd want the teachers' contracts to be setting their increases to what the town can absorb. I'm a broken record, but they've had declining enrollment for 17, 18 years, and yet their budgets go up and up and up. They're, like you showed the graph where, the taxes have far outpaced the rate of inflation over the last 10 years. And so if we were to say, try to peg it to inflation, in the years where we had very, very low inflation, the budget still went up at least 3%. So they're never going to come down and say like, oh, gee, inflation's 1 year, we'll just have a 1% raise. They'll never do that. They're always going to try to get the most they can out of their contracts. And as far like the contracts, they're only transparent after they're signed. Nobody knows what happens. Nobody knows how the sausage is made. Maybe some people do, but I don't, because it's a closed negotiation. So I say, while you show the taxes going up like 50%, where inflation's been cumulative 30%, per pupil spending has gone up 65%. They can't just say, we're going to go up 3% a year, or whatever, 4% a year, if that's the teachers' raises, when they have fewer and fewer students every year. They have to, I guess they've talked about this, that they're going to try to look at how they're going to do business differently, but they have to do business differently. Like I said, you talk about unsustainable practices. In the schools, like we talk so much about the town here, but the schools are 65% of our budget.
Absolutely not. Overrides are vital, and they need to be a part of a discussion. They should not be an expectation that it's okay down the line, we're going to take this other bump up. It is the one chance that we as citizens have to stand up and actually talk about what spending we're doing, and what we're spending it on, and actually have a time of reflection. That did not happen with the most recent override because we got just blindsided by the causes. So at this point in time, I have zero interest in agreeing to anything approximating a schedule or anything that would be regarded as a way to predict when an override will happen, because I don't think we need it yet, and I think it's going to bypass all of the potential exercises to make sure that the government is growing in a way that is reflective of the current taxpayers, not the taxpayers who built the programs 10, 15, 20 years ago.
So one of the things that we definitely discussed last year, when I say we, I mean we discussed last year, was that it hadn't been forecast. That in the years past, there had always been at annual town meeting, they would say, not for the fiscal year that we just voted in, but for the following fiscal year, be forewarned, we suspect we might need, we have an inkling that we're going to need an override. And that was absolutely vacant last year because of the crisis of health insurance and how it caught us completely off guard. Would you, as part of this policy, would you like to go back to saying, absolutely no way in heck do you get to declare in October that we need to have an override, that it should be seen from farther out and properly planned?
I agree.
So you do want to.
These should be planned events, but not triggered planned. These should be, we can tell a year out, and we've said for years, we see one coming.
Right.
Growth is outstripping, cost growth is outstripping revenue growth. But I don't think that's something that can be taken for granted, that needs to be strictly negotiated. And we've had way too many discussions where we have been told you had years to raise this issue. We started working on this project forever ago. Why are you bringing up the problem now towards the end? And so I don't want any room for any possible misunderstanding. If we say, yeah, we think maybe when this number gets hit or this inflation rate is hit, that we would maybe support an override, I don't want that being taken as any potential. I think we need to be super clear up front. Override is on a case-by-case basis, and it needs to be brought up early enough. And that's for everyone's benefit, that it be brought up early enough. But yeah, October's too late, except for in the case of an emergency.
Well, when there was a policy, I don't believe it was ever written down, it was no more frequently than every 3 years. And part of that logic was there's such a thing as override fatigue. And since last year we hadn't had one in forever, there weren't any symptoms of that. But in the past, when you went every few years, eventually there's a fatigue factor and they just don't pass. As I look at this ALG plan, I'd say, yeah, we can get through 27, 28's beginning to look dicey, and that would be 3 years from 25. Because there is a cumulative effect of if your compensation is going up 4 or 5% a year and your revenue is going up 3% a year, then you're losing 2%. which on a $100 million dollar budget, so pretty soon you're talking real money. And the theory was you go every 3 years and, if needed, and you try to buy as much as another 3 years in the override to carry you through the next 3-year period. In those days, we weren't doing much in terms of debt exclusions.
That's what I was about to jump in and say, I know that the language purists are going to kill me for this, but would you count a debt exclusion as equivalent to an override?
The most part Paul's been talking about was on operating overrides, because we weren't even thinking about debt exclusions. This is how we got to have so many old buildings that we've been replacing one after another. I think from the time we did the public safety building and the Parker Damien building, we didn't build another building in this town for 15, 20 years. During which time we didn't have many overrides. We can say we're not going to have a schedule. But unless we do something to correct the imbalance between our compensation model and our revenue model, I can tell you we're probably going to have one every 3 years. Because that's just the way the math works.
That's thoroughly depressing. Gang.
Several things I want to mention. Number one, I think fiscal constraint is a good thing. It's difficult to have a consensus on some overall fiscal constraints to stop the government from keep growing. Prop 2.5 is one of them. So we don't want to create a mechanism to bypass that. Number two is that if you tie this our support to the override with to the inflation or the union contract, then you create a mechanism that you kind of, when certain things happen, when there's high inflation or the high compensation grows, then the taxpayers are bearing the risk. And you don't want to do that because you want to wait until that happens, and that risk will be negotiated, will be compromised, maybe shared among the citizens, the taxpayers, the government, and the employees. So you don't want to create a mechanism that bypass that and say, when the inflation is too high, then we can have an override. That means the taxpayers are bearing the risks. I also think that, so when we talk about operating override, I think the better model might be having a better projection of the operating expenses growth, things such as the salary growth, the fringe benefit growth, and you will be able to see whether we're heading towards an override. And that you can see in the next 2 or 3 years, you can probably have a good sense of whether you're heading towards an override. And with that, I think that's a better model to make decision ahead of time rather than wait until that year and you say, we figure that we need an override.
I think the idea of doing a scheduled or, doing them on a certain frequency, again, I think that expectation would get built into contracts, and it would make it that much harder to do debt exclusion when you need them. Like, people aren't going to vote for an override every 3 years and then approve a $43 million building project too. Like, as a taxpayer, it's all the same to me.
That's why I started by saying we're not going to do it on a scheduled basis. That's what was one of the first phrases out of my mouth. Greg, then Alex.
One of the things that I think all of us may want to take advantage of is the meeting that will be next door tomorrow night at the library at 7 of the Economic Development Committee. Because one of the things that we're trying to do is anticipate what the town's finances are going to look like in the future. Guess what? One of the things that they're trying to take a look at is what's driving employment in this area. For example, it turns out a significant percentage of Acton's population works in healthcare. And so, surprise, surprise, all the cuts in the National Institutes for Health don't just ripple through universities, they also ripple through employment in this town. And the whole notion on can I afford to live in Acton may actually get started with where am I going to find a job? So I don't know the answer to that because interestingly enough, we didn't have a quorum at our Economic Development Committee meeting last week, and so we didn't get a preview of what's coming tomorrow night. I have no clue what it is, but I'm going to go there because that's the kind of data that I think will help inform decisions on, you want to look out 5 years? Man, there's a lot of things you need to know. And one of where the place where they intersect with us, yeah, they're a separate committee, blah, blah. Where they intersect with us is their mission is to say, okay, about 10% of the town's taxes are now paid by commercial, 90% by residential. How can we get the 10% to 11% or 12%? Because that then gets to the revenue side. And right now, we think we can't do anything about revenue. It just, we either find out what the state gives us or we hope they don't take it back. It would be nice if we understood what the strategic plan is for how are we going to get the kind of businesses into this community that will pay taxes that will help fund the services that make Acton worth living in.
I'm glad you went first, Greg, thanks. Do we have access to any FP&A, any, financial planning and analysis models? I mean, this conversation really boils down to what I've been doing during my day job for the last 50 hours, basically nonstop. I've been building out 10-year financial models for setting up manufacturing plants and stuff like that. And based upon estimated sales forecasts and demand volume. And it changes at the whim of the stock market or what we think a supplier can do for us. And if we want to, I can't think of a better way. If we want to get smarter about making the decision about an upcoming override, having all the ammunition in the requirements, a framework of policy, Steve, what you're saying, but having actual financial models that look out 5 years, that look out 10 years. And if this Economic Development Committee can do that for us, or if we can get something from the town manager, I mean, can we extrapolate this out 5 years and take a look at it? Because then we can see really quickly, top exec summary level of what the finances will look like, actual versus forecast for, and targets for 5 years. And then we can say, all right, year 4, fiscal year 28, there's going to be an override necessary for $3.5 million. Let's get all of our ducks in a row, figure out all the other factors, subjective and objective, and go from there. But, all of that, the question is, do we have financial models that we can look at from a forecasting standpoint that go out 5+ years?
Not yet.
Okay. Do we do that ourselves? Do we?
Would you like to serve on the Economic Development Committee?
Oh, yeah, okay. I wish I had more time. I'd like to discuss more of it because, that's something that I'm definitely glad to help with because it's something that we need, right? We have to be transparent about how we're working with, and the recommendations that we're making for the town and where's the money going to come from?
About 10 years ago, we had something like that. We built it ourselves. It was pretty kludgy, a bunch of interlinked Excel spreadsheets, but it was basically an assumption-driven model, so probably dealt with about 50 line items, what's your assumption about teacher's contract, what's your assumption about other contracts, what's healthcare going to do? The difficult thing was throwing in the capital pieces, because we had no real insight as to what they might be or when they might be. It was about a 10-year model, but the advantage of is you could have, one Excel sheet full of one case, and then you could go, okay, what if I change my assumptions and produce a different looking one? Pretty much fell into disuse because I think I was the only member that still remembered how to run it. And it was a 10-year model, and frankly, nobody ever liked to see the results.
Do you still have that kicking around somewhere?
Somewhere. I don't know whether I still have it or not.
I mean, there's two factors.
I wouldn't necessarily recommend a methodology.
Oh, sure. Well, there's two factors to any model, right? It's one, is it, it's garbage in, garbage out. And two, are you maintaining it, and is it sustainable? Are you looking at it all the time? Because information changes, every 2 weeks or every month. It's an ongoing process.
Couldn't we beef up the ALG workbook so that you have a tab for the capital, you have a tab for the schools, and they feed into this top sheet so that these numbers here aren't just hard-coded? Then you could, right? You have the the contracts, like the schools are in a $2 million hole because of the contracts. It's like, how do they must see that coming because it's in a contract. Like, why isn't that in a spreadsheet somewhere? I would love to see the ALG spreadsheet beefed up and have it be like single source of truth, as true as we can make it. And understanding that out years are less precise, but at least you can see problems coming. We can see a problem coming in this one already. It's got a $4.4 million shortfall in FY30. So, I mean, I would love to see something like that. And I'm a modeler too, so I'd help with it. I love doing that stuff.
So the LG spreadsheet did recently just get pared down. It was a larger document less than 2 years ago. And it had more tabs that fed into the top line, but that was deemed to be, not by the finance committee, but that was deemed to be too complicated and not what they wanted to move forward with. So I guarantee you we can dig up one of the older ALG spreadsheets. I'm sure I've got 10 of them on my laptop. But that did get changed within the last 2 years. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with you on that also. I'm going to sound pedantic, but that's how I'm coming across. I have a financial model that's at 3 different levels. One, it's the detail for the wonks that want to get into it. That is, 1,000 rows long and 1,000 columns wide. And then I have the managerial level that is a 50% distillation of that. And then on the top level, I have your CXO summary. And that's how, so if I need to give, here's your top level overview, you can look at it in 1 second. We can get to that sort of thing relatively easily with a 5-year, 10-year forecast. We can even do something like that for an ALG workbook. I'm happy to help with some Excel jockeying if necessary.
Great. I would like to, since I do not have a reputation for being quick with the compliments. When I see an opportunity to give one, I want to give it. Part of the problem 10 years ago is we did not have a 10-year plan out of either the school or the town. Both the school district and the town have come with 10-year plans. And so I would like to make sure to acknowledge that this is a level of detail that we did not have that many years ago. So at least we're going in the right direction. Now, to your point, Mr. Lenz, it's how well do we use that data to best understand the challenges facing the town? And yeah, we'll definitely take advantage of your volunteering hours. And that's not meant to be a threat of, thank you for saying something, but this is why we're a committee of 11.
Yeah, that's why, I, as my calendar clears up for more involvement on this committee, I want to be able to, that's why I joined, so I want to be able to help out.
And again, this is the first round conversation. Did you have more to say? Gang, I thought you were leaning in.
Right, so in my day job, I also take a look at these models, and my experience is that the more detailed data you got, the better the results will be, because government forecasting, financial forecasting is that each line item, like pensions, healthcare cost, and also have the different model than revenue models. So I think what I'm saying maybe there might be some idea to, like the government, when they are doing the budget, they don't just put up the budget for this year, but also a few years out. And that should also happen not just at the overall level, because, and then you can see the ALG budget, just overall operating budget increased by 3.75% every year. That's not helpful information. What we have for is at the department level, like a detail level, and then each line item, pension will probably go up by 7%. Health insurance will probably go up by 9%. That would be more helpful than having an overall number and then extrapolate. That's not possible to do that, because the nature of different expenses and revenues are different.
Chrissy?
I think that's a really dangerous road to go down, in that it's the town's job to run the town. And with the bottom line budget, there's a lot for us to understand about the growth of the buckets. But getting down to line item numbers is, with our current town manager, going to step on a whole bunch of toes, first of all. So I think it's going to be very hard to get agreement to any sort of prediction at that level and buy-in that we would need. But I think it's also, it makes it very easy for us to get stuck in the weeds on it, as opposed to, okay, we know salaries will grow this much. I think it's the, what's the 16-liner, Steve? Whatever.
26, which is actually 34.
Okay. Understanding the growth at that level of detail.
Yes, I understand that. Let me clarify. It's not like we're doing like the budget for 2 years ahead, 3 years. No, it's not like that. It's still annual budget. It's more like looking at the out-year deficit and looking at the out-year budgetary gaps, which is the analysis that you were suggesting. Not doing a budget 2 years ahead.
The original model we had was built on, for the town, the 26-liner, and for the schools, an abbreviated version of their summary by character code, which is probably about 50 lines. And I will point out, Mr. Chairman, that the original model was built by a subcommittee, if you're so inclined to nominate one.
We're not going to create a standing subcommittee tonight. There's enough meeting minutes and agendas we can worry about that at another meeting. We'll do it all en banc for a little while longer here, please. Okay.
One other thing, I don't have the financial background that a couple of you seem to have, so I will tip my cap at what you know that I don't. What I model is really squishy stuff like marketing. And one of the things that we've learned over 20 years is that if you can tie the KPIs of what it was you were trying to do with this week's anomaly that just suddenly popped up, you're in a much better position to make the mid-course correction you need to make, to accomplish whatever it was that you were trying to accomplish, even if it was something squishy like building a brand. My hope, and I don't know if this is doable, is that we not only will have a model that says, here's what we're trending over the next 5 years, but when finance comes in and says, okay, here's the latest quarter, we've identified ahead of time, excuse me, it did what? And that then will let us know when, I think we all understood the black swan moment of the healthcare costs last a year ago. Actually, it was longer than a year ago, wasn't it? 18 months ago? Oh, God, whatever it was.
I was living in dog years.
Yeah. And we don't know what the next one may be, but it would be nice to have built in, and I'll just give you the scenario that I'm watching right now. I did not realize that Emerson Hospital had cut back its ambulance service. That's having an impact on ambulance demand for the town of Acton, because somebody who used to provide some of those services isn't doing that anymore. And whether it's a Medicaid reimbursement issue or whatever, blah, 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 it bites us. And it would have been nice to sort of see that one coming before it bit us. And so that we could, who knows, But right now, one of the problem areas we're dealing with is do we have enough people to man the ambulances that suddenly seem to be in demand more than they used to be?
Also, I would just ask to Mr. Jarboe's comment is that before we move on to the next subject is going back to the budget review and FTEs, is that one of the FTEs, the fire prevention officer, plans to be funded by the building revolving account and then eventually over to the new fire revolving account. And so I think, Jason, you had mentioned the list of positions, and Greg, you as well, of positions that are funded offline from operating. And so a fire prevention officer creates revenue. And so it is one of those new FTEs, but it's going to create more revenue to the bottom line. So if you can consider that in your discussion. Thank you.
Okay, well, this was meant to be an initial conversation. I did take down some notes. We'll bring it up every so often when we have an otherwise light night. And I also think this is the type of thing that we should definitely be discussing heavily during the summertime, perhaps before we get into our point of view for the year. But doesn't mean I won't bring it up again in the near future. With that, we're going to move on to the next agenda item, which is the DPW conversation. And Selectman Martin has a presentation that he would like to give to us. And then Greg is going to follow up with his comments from the last DPW building committee meeting, which was last week. Welcome, Mr. Martin.
Good evening. Could somebody press the button so I can see the share key? It says that this step is needed for security. I don't know what that means. I've done this before, where I just put in the share key.
I thought you needed to join the meeting.
Oh, do you have a meeting running?
Yes.
I will join that. Thank you.
And Greg, is your network stable? Because I've found I've had to use my hardwire in the past, but if your network's stable, that's good. Do you want to join the meeting too? While it's up here on the screen?
Can you make me a
Yep.
panelist? Thank you.
You should be prompted now.
Yes, thank you. Almost there.
Eight, 6, 9. Yep. We'll get it back to you in a minute.
Okay, good evening, and thank you for allowing me to come here. Last time, you guys were discussing the space for the building, and so I put together this presentation to outline the space uses in the building, just so you guys would know. Also, I'm not sure how many people attended or watched the DPW Building Committee last week. About 8% of the space was cut during that meeting, and I will outline those pieces as well. Most of the pictures I'm showing you are before the cuts, but you'll see in the pictures where the cuts are. So this is the overall layout of the building. I'm going to be blowing these up piece by piece. The garages in the back, the mechanics bays are in the lower left, and the offices are on the lower right, and then in between there's a couple of workshops. So the design that we were talking about in the building committee before last week was 47,000 square feet. The design was reduced to 43,000 square feet at that meeting. It supports most of the DPW employees, except for the transfer station and cemetery employees. Weston and Sampson produced this design during a process of interviewing people in the DPW, finding out how they worked, what they did, and that kind of thing, and came up with a design to meet how the building would be used. Sorry, wrong way. So first, the garage. Most of these things, because I can't fit these huge pictures along with some text, so I'm going to show you a picture and then show you some text. This garage is big enough to store most of our equipment, but not all of the equipment. The smaller pieces of equipment that are, for the most part, not vehicles are in the corners, things like mowers and trailers and things like that. So the garage is the largest piece of the building. It's more than half the building. It's the lowest cost per square foot. It has the capacity to store 49 of our 56 vehicles and large pieces of equipment, basically the rolling pieces of equipment. In the most recent reductions that happened at the last building committee meeting, The width of the aisle was reduced by 4.5 feet. That makes it a little dicey to pull in some vehicles with large turning radiuses, but it's workable. Also in the garage has it's called a mezzanine, so you might think of it as being a balcony that overlooks the garage, and that upper part is used for storage. That was also reduced as part of the recent reductions. So the fleet storage is, the numbers you're going to see in the upper right of these slides. They're first of all, the gross square footage that includes the width of the walls and everything, and the net square footage is the interior space. That 23,890 square feet was the space before the cut, which was, in this case, 1,166 square feet, less than that. The mechanic spaces are, in the lower left of that original layout diagram. They include bays. Mostly the biggest part by far is the bays where they can pull in equipment to repair. On the left part of this diagram, there is the wash bay. That's been reduced out of the current design. We would hope to add that back, but right now, for the purposes of this discussion, it's not in the design. On the right side of this design, there's the places that they store parts and that kind of thing, and in the lower right here, that's some desks where they fill out paperwork on the repairs and what they did to each thing as they fix it, and then order parts and things like that. So that's a little shared space for the mechanics to do desk work. Stop me, please, at any time if you have questions. So I basically said all that space. In the bullets on this, the maintenance bays are 555-60 square feet. That maintenance base does not include the wash bay, which was reduced out of that. So the wash bay was about 1,900 square feet. That's now gone, but that's not included in the 55-60 square feet. The support for crews is in the middle of that original diagram that I showed you. It consists of two main pieces. On the left here are two workshops, one for the highway crew, one for the grounds crew, where they can do interior work. They do things like create signs that go on our roads, or repair chainsaws, things like that. On the left-hand side of this, the right-hand side of this diagram are the pieces of the space that support the crews, including the locker rooms, a space where they can get training and where they can go to in very long, especially snow plowing shifts. That's that multi-purpose room. And then there are two offices here for the assistant operations superintendent and the tree warden. So I'll just leave this up here for you guys for a second. You can see the square footage.
Quick question, is the multi-purpose room, is that also double as the break room as well?
Yes. I will say here, one of the suggestions that was talked about at two building committee meetings ago, and it was actually a suggestion from Select Board member Alyssa Nickel, is that that corridor along the back is now gone. So this is a kind of an innovative change to get from the office area to the mechanics area. You have to go through the garage, which is not a big deal, but it saves that yellow space at the top. So the workshops in the revised design will actually be pushed up in this diagram against the garage wall. And so they'll be indented into the building a little bit more than they are now. In the office and administration, I think we have 7 office workers. This is pretty normal office stuff, file storage. The town has lots of archive plans and things that it has to keep. Offices for folks, conference room, that kind of thing. That yellow area is the amount of space reduced in the current design, which forces a re-layout of the space. And that re-layout is in progress. I have a sneak peek a couple slides forward so you can see where that's going, but the re-layout is not cast in concrete or wallboard or anything else. So this area supports the people that are listed in the lower left of this slide, or the roles that are listed. I just want to emphasize, that the reason why the select board has been talked a lot about, that it's very difficult to remove these folks from the building and put them elsewhere, is that they interact with everybody. So I'll just go through and let you know that. So the operations superintendent really has to remain at this building and needs a space at this building, right? All his direct reports are in this building. The DPW director could be off-site, but again, the vast majority of his employees are in this building. There's a business manager and an office manager. Those 2 people do everything from managing the financials of the department, including ordering things when crews need stuff, to helping to manage the job and time planning for the crews. So, and many other things, and dealing with the public as well. Both of those people deal with the public that come to the DPW for some reason or another, and vendors, that kind of thing. It would be very difficult to have those people off-site since they do interact with the crews. Is it absolutely impossible? No, but it would be difficult. And then there are 3 people that work in the engineering department. The town engineer herself and another engineer, and we have an intern as well. So there's just 7 people. I think it depends, it's a little bit subjective as to which of those people you could decide to be moved off. It's a little difficult to decide who. The engineering staff also deals with the crews, and the crews don't have, they're not in front of computers, right? They're out, except in the morning and the evening. And so they can't really get on a Zoom with the town engineer because they'd have to maybe go home and use their home computers or something. And so the town engineer would be forced to come to this meeting to review plans or something for the next job, traveling back and forth to wherever her office was. And in addition, as I pointed out last time, we don't have space in other buildings in town. We would have to rent space, which is some tens of thousands of dollars plus, build to suit or not, So that's a difficult thing to figure out. This is the new layout. Again, this is a work in progress. Basically that there was only 1 desk in the space that I showed you that with the yellow stripe through it that was a place for a future employee. That is gone, and there was a large conference room and a small conference room. The small conference room is also gone. So, and then everything is moved around here just because the dimensions are such that, you know, where a closet fit before, it doesn't fit now, and we can move a closet over there and that kind of thing. So the layout is a bit different than it was 2 slides ago. But that area. Again, this area is kind of the smallest part of the building, and it does support those 7 people. And that's it, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I can go back and review a slide or whatever people want.
Thank you, David, for the presentation. I appreciate everything that you went through. What I want with the original size building that they asked without it shrinking for a significant reduction in price, I want to say it was 50%, but I'd have to read the email here more carefully. With the town is Medway. With a data point like that, I think it would make sense to at least explore this other consulting firm to see if there might be different savings that might make the building the original size as proposed, but still save the taxpayers money.
So unfortunately, the information in that email is not correct. It's not factually correct, and I'm sorry that it was sent out. So in Medway, Weston and Sampson did the feasibility study, and the other firm did the design. During the feasibility study, there's obviously an estimate of cost, but there's not a specific cost, like, you know, pricing for a designed building. And so this happens to us, it happens to other places too. There were different bids for the 2 things. You know, the feasibility study was one firm and the design was another firm. They were not fired. That's just not correct.
All right, so how do I I have one select board member from another town saying something, you're saying something completely, how do I validate your comments?
I can tell you that after that email,
Yeah.
the town manager contacted Medway and found out the story, and so what's in that email is not correct. So, we could do another design, right? Nobody is going to off the cuff say, oh, I can make it $10 million cheaper or $5 million cheaper or whatever. You need another design to do that, right? And the designs are not cheap, right? Mm-hmm. To design the building again would cost over $1 million. And yes, we could do that. I don't think we'd gain a lot from that. I will say that the reductions here are still being costed out, but we're looking at a total project cost probably under $38 million.
All right, so let me ask different questions because it makes no sense to go back and forth on that. I trust that the town manager did what you said. Just a couple quick ones, I'm sure other people have questions. When you talk about staffing that have to be in the building, my initial reaction to that is staffing can be in the building without having to have an office there or having physical space to be there. If they're managing, I'm assuming they're not managing behind a desk. They're managing by walking around and talking to people, engaging and looking at things. They can visit a site, manage, and not physically have to have an office there. That's just my gut on that. And then the second thing is just like I didn't understand why we're storing paper. Why don't we just scan things and have them electronic? I saw like 7 filing cabinets when I went through the walkthrough. Why do we have filing cabinets? Why don't we just make everything electronic? So that I'll stop with my questions after that.
That's an excellent suggestion, and we have plans to do that. It costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to digitize all the things that we have. You know, they're all various sized drawings and things like that. The scanning of something that's, 3 by 4 feet or even larger is not obvious, right? So, and we have archives, plans like that. There's so many of them that some are kept at the wastewater treatment facility. But we completely agree. Over time, we intend to digitize all those things. It does not make sense to keep the paper. So I will say that. And I think that, your discussions about the crew supervisors, they're the ones that really would leave the building. There's really just two of those, the operations superintendent and the assistant operations superintendent. Those two folks also have quite a number of direct reports. And so having an office to be able to deal with personnel issues is important. Could those two people live in cubicles instead of offices? Probably. But actually in the current redesign, then you need, which if you design corporate spaces, right, you need lots of conference rooms, in this case, probably one or two more, to be able to do private conversations. And so we have just lost a conference room in this redesign. There's only one for the office staff. And so, my point here is this is not that big a space. It's very difficult to make adjustments like those that you're suggesting to have a big effect on the price, right? Because it's not like we're moving, 100 people from offices to cubicles. We'd be moving 2, and then we need a conference room. So it's difficult. Could we do that? Yes. Would we save a lot of money? No.
I have a couple of questions. What did you say the final, you think the cost will be with this 8% smaller building?
This has not been fully costed, right?
Okay.
So we just so everybody does know, too, for the costing, there are 2 independent costers that were reconciled. And it turns out in many cases, they had the exact same numbers, so that was good. But we expect the number to be less than $38 million for project cost, not just the building cost. I don't know what the building cost would be. So what we were talking about in last blush, $43 million would be in the neighborhood of 38 or a little bit less than that.
Okay. My other question is, did we get multiple bids at any point, before we did feasibility, once we had a design, did we put that design out for bid?
So almost all the steps that we take as a town, they're all bid out. So the design was bid out. And then when we have the cost and everything done, and assuming that town meeting approves, then we would bid the project's construction, right? And, we usually get a small number, a handful of bids on that kind of thing. So we would probably have a few construction firms to choose from.
Okay, so that hasn't, okay, thank you.
No, we can't do that
Until you get approval.
town meeting has the money,
Gotcha.
right? Because we'd be on the path to signing ourselves up to
Sure, thank you.
spend the money, and we haven't appropriated the money.
Just to put a finer point on one thing that you just said, this $37 million that you just quoted, again, to be clear, that is the anticipated full project cost, because I don't want there to be confusion later where, in previous meetings, we've been told, well, there's the soft costs and there's that, and we get to 43 or 47, but you're now saying that you're anticipating, pending the official numbers that come back, when they come back in another couple of weeks, you're anticipating a $37 million total project all in.
I think I said less than 38, but 37 something,
Okay.
right?
37.6, okay.
Well, that's not costed yet, so I don't want to, that's a very exact number for not a very exact price. So But yes, the total project cost, we did have a little bit of a discussion last night as to whether, sometimes as you move forward, as you know from being on building committees, you can reduce the contingencies as things get more and more defined. There's a little bit of hesitation there because of, tariffs and other things that we might not want to reduce the contingencies yet. But that's where we are.
Do you want to do your presentation now, Greg, and then we can?
What are the magic numbers again?
So, 869-3377, 0843.
Recording in progress.
I will put yourself on mute. I will promote you. Now you can share.
The good news is most of this is not redundant to what David just presented, although we are both looking at the same proposal. So hopefully this is going to be additional news. Some of this will be perspective. And I have a bias. I want to disclose that up front. Before I got into marketing, I was a journalist. And we learned 6 questions to ask in every interview. And it turned out that even after I got out of journalism, they are the framework I use to try to understand things that I'm trying to figure out. So I am applying a framework to take a look at this building. So the first question that I take a look at is, what are we building? And I think all of you could probably cite the mantra here, wants versus needs. And that's a hard question to get at. And I will just confess, how do you know that what you really, 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 really want isn't something that you might actually not need? And so one of the ways that people try to get at this is the hard way. And we tried the hard way back in November, where they came in with the initial, here's what you asked us to build. We've designed it. It's about 46,884 square feet. By the way, that will cost you about 46.9 million. And even the members of the DPW Building Committee had sticker shock. So this is not a finance committee versus another board or whatever. It's like the people who've been putting their time in over the last 2 years to work on this recognize that that number would not fly. So on December 12th, they came back with a revision. And they took our suggestion about eliminating the phased construction, and they made a couple of other reductions. And that's then where the old version was at, the $43 million version that we knew about until last week. Now, last week, they cut 8,000, or not 8,000, they cut 8% out of the square footage. And David showed you an accurate close-up of each of these things. This is a sort of the, pulling back for a second, what's in yellow is what was in the $43 million version that got cut. And some of the cuts came out of the garage, some of them came out of the storage bay, wash bay, the corridor disappeared, some of the office space, et cetera, et cetera. And oh, by the way, you don't see it in the chart, but significantly, there was a reduction in the geothermal wells from about 40 to 30, and there was a savings in costs there. Now, the tough thing to say is, okay, we've reduced it. Is that what we need? And again, I'm not sure that there's an easy answer to this, but one way to skin that cat is to say, well, the folks at Weston and Sampson have been providing data on what other communities have done in the last 7 years, and that's the time frame they used, but that seems relevant because if you go too far back, you know, who knows, the inflation rates, who knows, whatever. But it seemed reasonable. They had a list initially of 20 communities, actually 22. 2 of them were in New York. I knocked the 2 in New York out. I took a look at the 20, and some of them were cities like Medford, and some of them were teeny tiny towns like Rockport. And I said, if I had to stand up at town meeting and say, this is a comparable community, I get, you know, questioned. So I knocked the outliers off. And I said, okay, if we have a community that is 20% larger than Acton or 20% smaller than Acton, and they've built a new DPW building in the last 7 years, and oh, by the way, how many accepted road miles do they have? Because that's what the DPW is responsible for. Not all the road miles in the town, because we don't do Route 2, that's not ours. But, you know, what are we responsible for? And we compare that to other communities. You can come up with what is called a road mile ratio. And if you look through all of that, the 8% reduction that we came in with last week is really, really close to the comparable 20 communities, or the comparable communities if you consider 20% larger or 20% smaller to be comparable. So, you know, is 2% close enough? Could we get closer? Hold that thought. There's a tighter framework that you can also use. And so this is why there is no easy answer. You got to make some choices. But let's say instead of looking at communities that are 20% larger, 20% smaller, we look at the ones that are 10% larger or 10% smaller. It's a shorter list. And in this case, when we compare what we're planning to do with the 8% reduction, we're about 5.7% larger than that list. So again, this is another one of those great cases where we've made progress, we're getting closer. We're still at sort of the high end of the comparable list, and whether we're a little high at the high end or sort of a little bit more at the high end is sort of where we're at. Now, that then brings us to the new cost. And again, the reason why there is an asterisk on the 37.6 million is because it was stated publicly last night at the select board meeting. I went back and I checked ActonTV. I think I'm quoting it accurately, but there were all kinds of caveats around it. This is a back of the envelope, ballpark estimate. We're sending it off to a couple people who are going to look it over and come back and say, yes, no, maybe, whatever, but, you know, this was a public number that was shared at a public meeting. And so it's as close to a working number as we've got. You know, is it cast in concrete? No, not until we get the estimates back. And that won't be for another week or two. It's sometime in March. And so Okay, let's work with this number, 37.6 million. Is that in the ballpark? Well, it's a little high if you use the comparable method. Another way that you can try to figure out if we're in the right zone or not is to say, okay, do the costs justify the benefits? And one of the observations I'll make is that some of the benefits that are in the presentation material are vague. As a marketing guy, I know what it's like to be accused of being vague. So I spot vague when I see vague. And so something like, well, there's going to be improved recruitment and retention. Okay, I'll nod my head. How much? What's that worth? Is it worth 37.6 million? Well, we've got a department with 34.3 FTEs. That means $1 million?
It means $3 million, because you're forgetting that this can be bonded.
Oh, okay, sorry. Let's put it this way. That's a hell of a retention plan. I think a gold watch might get us farther, but that's me. Or improved public service response time. Now, there is a beautiful, brilliant YouTube video that shows all the vehicles pulling in and out to try to get ready to go out and plow the snow. Yeah, I know, it's stop motion, it's you put a soundtrack to it and be really funny. But again, the question is, if we get out to plow the snow, 20 minutes faster, 30 minutes faster, 40 minutes faster, every time it snows, what's the benefit there? Can you do a cost-benefit analysis? And so one of the missing numbers, David, that, as a member of the committee, I'm going to try to work on, because somebody's going to ask me for these numbers, and I don't have them yet, is we ought to have some calculations like that. We ought to be able to say, well, we did the math and, having a new building is not the benefit. Having a new building that enables us to be more responsive or productive or hang on to employees, or that has a calculable cost, and we haven't calculated it yet. Now, it brings us back to us. Yeah. We put together a pretty good document, actually. I was surprised. Huh? Oh, is that because I'm saying good things about the document?
No, it's because we want.
Oh, no, never mind. It's a really good document, though. The point of view that we came up with, I think holds up pretty well. And here we are talking about things that can change overnight. Well, gosh, we're 8 months, 6 months, 7 months later, it still looks pretty good. We still think an override would fail. I still think that. We still think that debt exclusions are unaffordable at this time. Probably. We also wanted to smooth things out and not have any debt exclusions until fiscal year 2029. I might budge on the 2029 timeframe. I think I said at our last meeting that, maybe it's 2028. I don't know, but it's, this spring. I don't know. I don't think so, but that's me. And then I went after the number that's missing. And this is the number that I wish I could tell you I could predict this with more certainty, but the people who's supposed to know don't know either. But they're watching this like a hawk. And it turns out that these tariffs are supposed to take effect March 12th. I don't know when we're going to get our estimate. I hope it's not March 11th. But one of the challenges that we're going to have to deal with is deal with this contingency. What happens when the tariffs hit? Or will they hit? Or will Trump pull another, oh, Canada, don't worry, you got 30 more days, I'll think about it some more. Don't know. Boy, if I could predict that, I would leave the Finance Committee and make a strategic bet and spend time on an island, but okay. But the people who are in the industry, Construction Dive is the industry trade press. And they interviewed the people out in Chicago at Gordian who basically are the people you go to get these kind of analysis done. So they're not a construction firm, they're an analyst firm. And they said, well, when these tariffs hit, it's probably going to push some people to delay construction. Okay, why? Well, it turns out, not because we're fear-mongering, not because we're imagining the boogeyman, not because we are trying to ramp stuff up, but because Trump has raised tariffs 25% on steel before. He did it in 2018. And in 2018, the price for benchmark steel jumped 14% in the first year, 10% in the second year. And then we all got distracted by COVID, and so we stopped taking a look at what the price of steel was. So what is likely to happen on March 12th? Don't know, can't promise it for sure. But if we take the data that we have, which is the best that we've got, and we apply it, yeah, when we built the public safety building, there was a lot of steel in that. Now, that was 22 years ago, so I'm not sure we can use that as a benchmark for today. But it's probably gonna be the, keep your eyes focused, because this is the one to watch for. So, what do? Well, we got the 8% reduction. But I want to give David some credit here, because he came to our meeting last week and he said, are there any other ways we can reduce the scope of this thing? Kudos to you, David, thank you. And he actually had two ideas that I thought were so good, I want to share them with you, although David can expound on them. One of which is, there's a couple of the offices at the sort of the far right of that reconfigured office thing that he showed us. Maybe we don't build them now. Maybe we come back and build them a couple of years from now. That's a way of getting the scope down. And the other suggestion that he had that I liked a lot was, okay, we have different kinds of equipment. Some of the equipment, like the snow plows, we need in the heated building in the winter to get out to plow the snow. But there's other summer equipment that you don't need to get in a heated building, you just need to get it in a covered building. And in the summer, by the way, you can swap. You move the snow plows into the covered building and, you know. And it was sort of mentioned at our meeting last week, and well, if we need another card up our sleeve, we'll go back and take a look at it. But probably not between now and town meeting. Maybe it's the fallback plan if the election fails or the town meeting fails and we need to think about this a second time. So that brings us to us. We've got to make some decisions. Guess what? There's other boards and committees that have to make some decisions too. We're going to all have to make decisions with not quite being sure what the tariffs are going to do. And trust me, I don't have better insight than somebody else does on that one. That's just, I know it's the wild card in this particular game. And then we're supposed to give advice, whether we recommend, pro, con, whatever, to voters. who are then going to have to make their best guesstimate twice. And that's the who, what, why, where, when, and how of what's in front of us.
Anybody care to comment? Or are we just going to do this all again on Friday with the select board? Sure, David?
So just about the tariffs, if that inflated the cost of the project so much, it would just stop, right? Because town meeting would appropriate an amount of money. And if we go to contract, to go to ask for bids and we don't get anybody to bid what town meeting has appropriated, we probably don't move forward, right? Or we have to make some other kind of decision, some kind of staging decision or something, I don't know. But that's not really a risk to the taxpayer in that sense, right? They appropriate what they appropriate, and they're not going to be, we can't overspend that, right? We can't say, oh, the cost of steel went up 25%, and that's half the materials cost, so it's 12% more than you appropriated. I mean, if we did that, we'd have to ask them at another town meeting to go again. So it's not an overspending risk, it's a stop of the project risk.
Yeah, David, I think I've been talking about, does all the equipment have to be in a heated space all the time? It makes a lot of sense to me that you could switch equipment storage based on season. Seems to me it would reduce the cost. Why would we hold that back as an idea to maybe compensate for tariffs, when indeed if tariffs go through, I don't think we're going to have enough money to get this thing built. My last job was making ball bearings, and I studied steel prices quite a bit. We don't, as a nation, make a lot of steel. It comes from somewhere. A lot of it comes from Canada, actually. So I don't know why we wouldn't just advance that proposition now. Perhaps lower the cost of the project and give it a better chance at passing.
My father works in construction. When COVID hit, plywood went from $20 a sheet to 80 plus. And it makes me really curious with your data, Greg, how many of those projects were post that COVID huge jump, and were they therefore made smaller to compensate for that? So I don't, without a year next to the various projects, I don't know how comparable some of those towns are, even with all of your other.
Most of the towns there happened back before COVID. The one that came closest that was in the COVID window was Arlington. And I knocked it off because it was just a 46,000 population town that seemed not as comparable. And so the closer you get to the COVID zone, we also got to the anomaly zone. So it dropped out.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if some of those variations that drive the overall average are from that really big jump that we had there. So I don't know how much I would be.
Well, then let me tell you something about that methodology then, because I didn't look at the prices. I looked at the square feet.
And what I'm saying is they might have decreased square feet because of the price of materials.
Because of the price,
I mean,
okay.
which
Fair
is
enough.
the same thing we're looking at right now, making it smaller
Fair enough.
because of cost.
And that brings in, so we got, this is going to sound way more callous than I mean it to be. We got super lucky that we built the the boardwalk school the time that we did, because we did it in the dead middle of COVID, which did have some supply constraints, and things didn't arrive as quickly as we wanted them to. I'm looking at you, the German-built turbines on the top of the building that came in 6 months late. But the cost for that project went down because we were in a recession, because people were dying for work. So that helped us. And the other thing that helped us is the interest rates collapsed. Unfortunately, with tariffs, the interest rates are not going to collapse. They're going to go the other direction. The only way that interest rates are going to go down is if we're in a really bad recession. Which, again, we're 30 days into the Trump presidency. Let's see what happens the next couple of months. None of us can crystal ball this. But if you're looking at the what ifs of what could have happened during the times of COVID, remember, there's no way we'd have been able to build the boardwalk campus for 2.153 30-year blended borrowing rates, which we'd love to be able to get for another large project. So just adding that in as another variable we have to pay attention to. Yeah, go ahead.
I'd also like to point out that in our point of view, the 2029 year, where we recommend not having an override before then, is, I believe, in large part based on an error in the ALG model, which said that that was the year when the debt from the junior and senior high renovation dropped off, but it in fact has dropped off now, so that was sort of based on a misinformation.
Is that a hand raised? So you're.
Is there a decision that we want to make tonight based upon this, or is it just a continuing conversation based upon from a couple of weeks ago?
I'm not looking for a final position tonight for the simple reason of I would like to go into Friday's meeting with the select board with as open a mind as possible. That said, the time for us to make our recommendation and get it, that this window is collapsing quickly.
Right.
And if we're not going to get a hard number until the third or fourth week of March, third week of March is.
Yeah, tariffs.
I think we're also looking at the 12th. I believe that's the case.
Oh, dripping with irony.
But again, we wouldn't know the impact on day one anyway, right? So, the impact of the tariffs if they go into effect on that day.
Agreed,
So.
but we would know if they do go into effect or if this is all smoke and mirrors. But to your point, the drop dead date that we have to make up our mind to be done with this is
Yeah.
April 15th, because that's the day that the warrant goes to print.
Right.
That then goes to every house in town, every address in town, everybody in town. So, we got 6 weeks.
Yeah.
I don't think we need to make up our mind tonight, but in the next meeting or two, we're probably going to be making up our mind.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I have another too. Actually, three things popped into my head as I was listening to everyone. Greg, with your comparisons, and I saw Burlington jump out there, and I saw Norwood with and I'm thinking that they have their commercial areas versus their residential areas are substantially higher. I wonder if there's a factor that weighs into the comparables based upon percentage of commercial versus residential, and what sort of involvement is with those DPWs.
The answer is I haven't looked at that, but we can dig into it. And the reason I showed two lists of comparables is I'm not even sure we've got the final list of comparables that we'd want to stand up at town meeting with yet.
Right, right.
But I wanted to give you sort of ranges. But yeah, there are other filters that we could try to apply. Because I think that gets to one of the squishiest issues, which is, how do we know this is right-sized?
Right, what's the what is the proper benchmarking? Because, Burlington was an outlier with a 66,000 square foot building, but I can see that because they might be offering a lot of services to, the mall and everything else. And then the other two things are kind of related, and they're just food for thought, is that this building is $1,000 a square foot? Right, it's give or take, right, give or take? And then, what did you say, it's 34 FTEs? And if it's bonded, that's approximately like, 3.5 million per FTE over the course?
So I'd want to be a little more careful with my math. The current expectation is on the order of 2.3 to 2.5 million
Yeah.
per year for 30 years.
Right,
And if there are 34 employees, but there's only 6 that are, the rest of the people are show up, shower, or show up, go to work, come back and shower. So that's definitely something we need to weigh in on. I'm sorry to cut you off. I know you have more to say.
no, that's kind of it, and I wanted to spur on the conversation, like lifetime earnings versus cost per employee.
Well, and so I got, when I was talking to the town manager about this, he made it clear that shouldn't be using a 30-year number. I should be using a 60 or 70-year number because that's how long the building's going to be in play. And I would say, maybe 30 years is too short for me to just pay attention to the cost of the bond, but maybe 70 years is a bit pie in the sky as well.
Right.
So there's probably some middle ground in the end there. Part of what I wanted to make sure that we point out is, I'm not even sure, I appreciate you doing all the work on the comparables, Mr. Jarboe, but I go back to what I said at the beginning of all of this, which is the most expensive way to build a building is to do it from a municipal perspective. I would love to have seen a significantly smaller building, like tiny compared to this, that addresses the only glaring need that I see at the DPW building when I walk through it. And the only glaring need I see are the changing rooms, the locker room configuration. So I would much rather than just be directed from the feasibility committee said we needed a new building, I would much rather we take a complete step back and say, the main thing that we need to solve from an employee retention perspective is to make it so that the urinal's not right next to the locker. So let's put in the smallest effective building for the 6 employees who are going to be there full-time and the workers that come in, drop off their lunch, jump in the trucks and drive away. I know the cinder block building is an eyesore. I know no one likes that cinder block building. When you have to pay the absolute top dollar because you made the mistake of being a municipality and the laws are such that you have to pay the prevailing wage, you should do everything in your power to avoid building a gigantic building. I would much rather we build a small building that solves the need. Repurpose the cinder block building because it's got easy heat for the vehicles that need to be heated in the winter. And they are certainly not all 59 vehicles, 47 to 59 vehicles. I'm not really sure how we use 59 vehicles, but again, I'm not a DPW worker, so I can definitely be accused of not understanding why we need quite that many vehicles and 23 plows. 23 was the number we counted, Roland? It was a huge number of plows. While I appreciate doing this comparison, this is like peer pressure, right? Why do I care what the other towns built? I care about building what's right for this town. And I would argue that what's right for this town is a nice, small, new building that addresses the personnel part. And then we leverage the stuff that we already have and make it something that's way less expensive and therefore affordable and meets the need rather than the want. I've gone round and round with people on this topic, And you can call me a Philistine, but there is no way in hell I can understand why every piece of equipment that we have needs to be in a radiant floor heat garage. You're never going to convince me of that. I'm sorry. You just aren't. Did I interrupt any of your other questions?
I like the radiant flooring at my house, so I can see why would somebody, it's pretty awesome. Came with the house though, but my house is over-engineered. No, that was it. I mean, and I agree with that. It goes back to asking the question, is the wants versus the needs. What is the number one thing? And if that is indeed what it is, for the personnel specifically, there's some I wouldn't even call it a short-term fix. There is something that can be done that will not, risk the appetite. There's no appetite for an override, right? So that's it. Thank you.
Greg?
I just want to defend my comparable list. I put a lot of work into that.
And I did thank you for it.
Yeah.
Oh, I wasn't discounting at all.
No.
I think of,
But
I was just thinking
here,
of different factors.
Here.
No.
In fact, I shared this story with one of the editors of the Acton Exchange this week, who accused me correctly of looking beyond the town's borders when I was writing stories. I was writing about communities like Maynard, all the way out there, or Boxborough, just really, really out there. And I went back to her with this anecdote. I said, there is a real provincialism in New England that just comes with the territory that showed itself in a headline in a newspaper, the Vineyard Gazette. And one week, their weekly paper, the headline said, "Local flags at half-mast." And the story, when you finally got into it in the second or third paragraph, said, "Oh, by the way, Pearl Harbor was bombed last week." And the anecdote is that sometimes we like to, if it doesn't happen in Acton, it doesn't count. And I would tell you that the select boards and the finance committees in hundreds of towns across this Commonwealth are wrestling with similar issues like we are. They have to make compromises like we do. And guess what? Occasionally we can learn some lessons from them, and some of them may learn lessons from us. And if we can come up with a better solution, boy, I can tell you there are folks in Maynard right now who are watching Acton's how we are going to do with the DPW building, because they need one down the road too. So yeah, I'm going to stand up for my comparables.
Just have a question, and I probably should have emailed the whole team here, but in a prior meeting, I believe there was a reference to the cost of this project as it was previously presented at, I think it was $500 for the taxpayer per year. Then that was corrected by the town manager, and I think David as well, to a $300 figure. And my question is, was the $500 calculation correct? And is the $300 calculation factoring in the roll-off of debt? And in that, is the $300 a net figure and the $500 a gross figure? What was the answer? I think it was Steve that did the math. Was it you that did the math on 500? I remember hearing 500.
It happened before I got on the DPW. That was done before I got on the DPW committee, so I'm not familiar with that calculation.
It was happened during Finance Committee.
It was here?
Yeah, that's why I'm mentioning it, to
Wow.
Finance Committee.
Then I was sleeping.
Okay. Does anybody remember?
David?
The debt service would be about 2.6 million, assuming an interest rate of 4.25%, which means the average single-family house would be $337 a year, and the average condo would be $197 a year.
So where did the 500 come from?
I think someone read something wrong and added in other debt, like for the fire station and, or something. I don't know, but it's not right, even if it was said.
I know it was corrected. I just was trying to understand the baseline.
I think someone was looking at a combined level of deferred debt. So,
Okay. Thank you.
may I also say that there is no plan to heat the garage with radiant heat? And there never was. I just don't want that to get out there that we're going to heat the garage. There will be, the garage is minimally heated, probably with an air blower with warmth from a heat pump fed from geothermal wells.
Thank you for that clarification. A reminder, we'll be back here on Friday night, 7 o'clock with the select board. And I suspect that meeting will be the last opportunity for minds to be changed. And then, when do you plan on having the draft warrant?
It'll be gradually between now and April 15th. It was on our agenda last night. We skipped it because we were running past midnight. It's in the packet. If you want to go look at it, there is an article list. And we were going to begin discussing that, and we deferred it just because. So we'll be working on it from our next meeting through till the time it gets printed. My guess is around April 1st. I like April 1st because you can't hold me to that one. Because it's April Fool's Day. But no, around April 1st, there'll be the text of the warrant.
2 weeks is exceptionally short. Okay, so we'll have to start carving up the article list probably in our next meeting. Because I believe in the past, we've had greater opportunity than one or two meetings to go through all the topics, invite the different groups in. Because we usually invite in the CPC and we'll invite in any of the other, if there are citizen petitions, we like to try and have an opportunity to weigh in on them rather than be shotgun. So 2 weeks is a little tight, sir.
Yes, so we'll be on the exact same schedule as you. And so we're going to begin to probably divide up our, assignments for warrant articles. I will note also that the motions are not in the warrant. And so, for any article, I mean, we will probably have agreed on the amounts beforehand, but they're, as Mr. Noon points out, every now and then the ALJ is in some cases agreed the night before, in which case the number in the motion comes the night before.
Mr. Chairman, you can bring in people to talk about things before you have the final language.
Agreed.
Our custom is that we don't vote anything until the final number. This goes into the warrant, and we don't vote until after we have a public hearing.
Okay. Christie?
With the move of the election date to later, I'm wondering if that's why we're getting the warrant later in the season too. But I'm hoping you could encourage the town manager to have a draft warrant sooner than we are for the sake of due diligence.
Yeah, I'll try to do that. Mostly that's up to the board, and I'll try to press on that.
Okay. Believe the next item is committee business. We had one meeting minutes that we needed to review. I heard from Roland that under Christie's section, there was a typo where the word specific is missing an E. Thank you, that's a very eagle-eyed, that's excellent. Are there any other adjustments that need to be made to the meeting minutes from January 31st, 2025, joint FinCom Select Board meeting?
Motion to accept as amended.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And abstentions? That is approved. Okay, now on to liaison reports. Other than Greg telling us to make sure to go to EDC tomorrow night, do we have any other liaison reports? Scott?
Since our last meeting, I attended the Health Insurance Trust meeting, and I will be very brief with this since it's getting late. They're doing well. At the end, at 12/31, they had a credit balance of $137,000. They're going through the run out at this point, and the contract closes in June of 2025. That's just sweet and to the point.
Excellent. Any other liaison reports? Okay. Mr. Lenz? Oh, Roland?
What time is the meeting on Friday?
I believe it's 7 PM.
Thank you.
Yes, Marianne?
May I just ask a question? So Scott, the contract that runs out in June, and which contract is that, do you know? The one that's going to run out in June? I know, I'm sorry. And we can just say contract. We
My
can just
very
say
detailed
contract.
notes here.
Contract ends in June.
I believe it's the, I believe it's the,
Gallagher, maybe, or Brigadi Harrison?
I'm not sure.
That's all right, I'll just say contract ends in June.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
'Cause that's what I wrote. That's all, I didn't say which contract. I just wrote contract ends in June. All right.
I'd like to motion to adjourn.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
We gotta